Did I hear Howard's in there?
Here, I've been listening.
Oh, good.
I've been listening.
Well, great to have you here. I heard you breathe.
Thank you.
I was saying that your book should be required reading for every American.
Thank you very much.
I found out one of the local high schools has it as an optional course for their gifted children, which was great to hear that a local mainstream high school had it.
Well, that's happening more and more. It's when my book first came out, it was sort of like an underground book. Teachers had to secretly Xerox pages and hand it out to their students. And now whole departments and schools use it, and I'm a little worried that my book has become too respectable.
It's a good thing. So I'm thrilled to have you here, and I'd like to give you an agenda here.
Okay.
I'm curious what you would like to be seeing happening with America, with democracy, with the United States, in the years now and in the years to come. How would you like to see changes happen, and what do you see that people could be doing?
Yeah, well, there's two big questions. The second one is actually more difficult than the first. That it's not too hard to figure out, and most people, if they sat down and thought about it, no, they wouldn't find it too hard to figure out, what should America be like? What should our country be like? Then figuring out, but what to do? That's of course a tough one. But let me deal with that first question, okay? What kind of country do we want to live in? And I would say, first of all, I would want to live in a country that didn't scare other countries in the world. I'd like to live in a country that didn't bully other countries. And remember, I'm not just talking about the present situation in Iraq or Afghanistan. I'm talking about historically. This is very deep-rooted. It's not just a problem of today. What is deep-rooted is American expansionism and American control over other countries, going back to taking half of Mexican land in the middle of the 19th century, going back to invading Cuba, going back to invading the Philippines and sending Marines into every country in Central America, and then of course coming up into the present. And, now we have military bases in 100 countries in the world. No, I don't want our country. I think Mark Twain once said, I don't want Uncle Sam to plant his foot on the throat of any other people. He was saying this in relation to the United States' cruel invasion of the Philippines. No, I don't want the United States to have military bases in other countries. There's no need for it. I mean, here we are, this very powerful country, huge number of people, surrounded on both sides, right, by oceans, and on the north and the south by Pacific neighbors. I mean, who is more secure than the United States? Why do we need all these military bases? Why do we need to spend $500 billion a year on war and preparation for war? So my first requirement for a country that I would really be proud of is for this nation to no longer be a military superpower. I would want us, we can't help being a superpower in the sense that we're so rich and so many resources. We can't help being a superpower in that sense, but we don't have to be a military superpower. We could be a humanitarian superpower. We could use our enormous wealth to help, not only to help people in this country, when you think of all the needs we have in this country, in this richest country in the world, all the needs we have, but to help people in other countries. Instead of sending our Air Force to bomb Iraq, which should be sending planes over with food and medicine, I'm thinking of the helicopters that have dropped bombs and fired rockets in various parts of the world, and think of how when Katrina took place, or for that matter, when the tsunami took place. In other words, when disasters hit people here and in other countries, helicopters were needed to transport people to safety, and they weren't available. They were off somewhere in the military zone. So yes, my first requirement would be a peaceful country, and a country that, and then, of course, you can imagine how other countries would look at us. Think of how other countries look at us now. I mean, I was just talking to somebody today who said, you know, when he goes abroad, he knows that people abroad are first looking at him as an American and wondering who he is and where he stands, because they do not like what America is doing in the world. America is unpopular in the world. So, yeah, it's not that I'm doing this just to be popular. Doing it because it's right. But in being right, we would be respected by people all over the world, not feared, respected. So that would be my first requirement. And then my second requirement would be that we take all that money that we have saved, all those hundreds of billions, actually trillions of dollars that we have expended in, you know, these last years on war in the military. And imagine what we could do with that. We could have free health care for everybody. We wouldn't have to fool around with these half-baked insurance plans that all of the candidates have proposed. And, you know, sure, the Democrats, Hillary, Obama, have proposed better health plans than McCain and better health, but they were very complicated and really depended too much on insurance companies, on corporations. And we should be having one of those health systems that they have in other countries where people get health care free and there's no question about it. Or to put it another way, we should have the kind of health care that people in the military get. People in the military, they get free health care. They don't have to fill out forms. Nobody asks, do you have insurance? Nobody asks, do you have some pre-existing medical condition? You just go and get yourself taken care of, and the government pays for it. When I was in the Air Force and I had pneumonia, and I was totally taken care of. I didn't have to worry about was I insured. We should have that for every single person in this country. And we can afford to do it, especially we can afford to do it if we no longer have to spend these huge sums of money on armies.
It seems to me that when you described the persona that we manifest in the world, it's almost like Buzz Lightyear, the cartoon character who's wearing all kinds of armor and extra military gear, and who's got weapons strapped all around him.
Yes.
This is the macho American that needs to be manifested in the world.
Yeah,
is this part of our history? Does this go back to the beginnings of the founders, or is this a more recent manifestation?
Well, it's gotten much more virulent and much more stark and much more dramatic recently. But from the beginning, from the time of the Revolution, we became an expansionist nation. A lot of people don't think about the American Revolution as something that was detrimental to other people. We think of it only as winning independence from England. But think of the Indians who lived on this continent. Before the American Revolution, the British had drawn a line. They called it the Proclamation of 1763. They drew a line just to the west of where the colonies were, and they said, no, you can't go over this line. That's Indian territory. Well, they didn't do it because they were kind. They did it because they didn't want trouble. But once the English were defeated and the Revolution was won, well, the Proclamation of 1763 was dead. And then, from the end of the Revolution on, well, the American colonists began moving west and encountering Indians. And that started the long march westward involving the taking away of Indian land, pushing the Indians farther and farther away, massacring them when they resisted, and pushing them finally into a little part of Oklahoma which was called Indian Territory. And then when oil was discovered in that territory, pushing them out of that territory, and so they had no place to go except so he could put them on reservations.
Of course, the colonists had a long history before them of other explorers destroying cultures and taking over territories.
Yeah. It starts with Columbus. It starts with the Spaniards, and then with the French, and all the Europeans come here, and the Europeans barge into Indian territory. They're looking for furs. They're looking for gold. They're looking for land. That's been a very fundamental feature of our country's history. And yes, you're right. It goes way, way back. It goes back to the Revolution. It goes back to taking Indian territory and crossing the entire continent. And then once we cross the entire continent, we look southward into Cuba, and then we look westward into the Philippines and Hawaii. And soon we are a world power. And we're supposed to feel good as Americans. We are a world power. No, I don't feel good that we are a world power if that power is accumulated as a result of invading other people's land and taking their resources, which is what we've been doing.
Well, I want to change track a little bit here, because I don't know how much time you've got to give us here.
Well, I said it would be a half hour total.
Okay. So one of my agendas is I'm real interested in the idea of bottom-up versus top-down. And the way I kind of think of you as the person who has written a bottom-up version of American history. And kind of looking at history from the little people, from the average people. And I just wonder if you have thought about it in those terms much, or
well, sure, because most of our history is taught from the viewpoint of the people in power. Presidents dominate, Congresses dominate, Supreme Courts dominate, generals dominate, and nobody asks, well, what about those people below? I mean, the revolution is fought, and they talk about the founding fathers, and everything is glorious and patriotic. What about the soldiers, the privates, the small farmers who went into the revolution? And by the way, the blood toll of the revolution was proportionately greater than the blood toll in World War II. A lot of people don't know this. I mean, this is a bloody war, and the working people, the farmers, the poor guys who enlisted, they were treated badly, and they mutinied. When you look at the revolution from the standpoint of poor people, and not from the standpoint of Adams and Madison and Jefferson, when you look at it from the standpoint of poor people, it's not simply a glorious thing. Because when the revolution ends, these poor people, they're veterans of the war, and they try to farm little pieces of land, some of it given to them as sort of bonuses for serving, and then they find the land is being heavily taxed, and they can't pay the taxes, and the land is taken away from them. This is the root of Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts and rebellions in other states. So if you look at American history from the standpoint of the little people, of the workers, of the farmers, and certainly, of course, if you look at American history from the standpoint of black people, then history looks very, very different. You look at Andrew Jackson, for instance. I remember learning history in school. Andrew Jackson, the great Democrat. Jacksonian democracy, that was the phrase. Well, Jackson was a slaveholder. He was a racist. He was an Indian killer. And he would not allow abolitionist literature, anti-slavery literature, to be disseminated in the South. And you look at American history from the standpoint of the people on top, and then what happens is you are drawn in to their way of thinking. It's like today when the television stations and the newspapers all fasten on the president. They fasten on the existing president, or they fasten on the people who will be president, and they don't ask, well, what about the ordinary American? And why not look at policy from the ordinary American's point of view? Let's look at this Iraq war not from the standpoint of the White House and the strategists and the oil corporations. Let's look at it from the standpoint of the GI. And furthermore, let's look at it from the standpoint of ordinary people in other countries who are the victims of our policy. So, when you look at history from the standpoint of the people at the bottom, everything looks different. And then you recognize that the policies that we have followed in this country from the beginning have been policies that benefited the upper classes. That's not hard to see when you look at all the legislation passed by Congress all through history. It was legislation not to benefit the poor. It was legislation to benefit the railroads and the steel industries and the manufacturers and the oil companies. The only times that we have had legislation in this country to benefit the poor was when the poor revolted. I'm thinking of the 1930s and the 1960s. When we had huge strikes all over the country in the 1930s, tenants organizations, unemployed councils, agitation all over the country. Well, then the New Deal reacted, and we got Social Security, and we got unemployment insurance, and for the first time we had legislation to help the lower classes. But that's a very important point, because you ask, what can we do? Well, we have to think beyond elections, beyond voting. The important thing is not who is sitting in the White House. The important thing is who is picketing outside the White House. What is going on in the country? What mattered in the Vietnam War was not who was president, because whether you had a Democrat or a Republican in the White House, we still carried on the Vietnam War. What mattered was that people began to organize and protest and demonstrate, and GIs began to revolt. And this rebellion from below created a situation where finally we had to get out of Vietnam.
So do you think that we're approaching a time where that's what it's going to take now to clean up the mess that is really a huge mess?
It will take that. It will take a new movement. It will take a movement which combines the energy of the civil rights movement and the labor movement and the women's movement. It will take citizens organizing, immigrants, native-born, and because we need fundamental change in this country, and neither party is going to give us fundamental change. Maybe it'll be a little better if Obama gets in, but we're not going to have the kind of country that we need to be until there's a new, great citizens movement, until democracy comes alive, in other words.
What will that look like?
What will
that look like? How will that emerge? How is
it going to happen? I wish I knew exactly. You can never predict how something will take place. You know that something has to take place. For instance, in early 1950s, if you asked, how are we going to get rid of racial segregation in the South? What is the process? What is the scenario? I mean, how could anyone predict what would happen? How would anyone predict that a woman would refuse to sit where she's supposed to sit on the bus? That this would cause a certain kind of spirit to rise in the black community? How could you predict that 4 students in 1960 would do a sit-in in Woolworths in Greensboro, North Carolina, and this would spark dozens and dozens of sit-ins, and this would lead to Freedom Rise? And in other words, there's no way of predicting how a movement develops. All you can do, really, you do your part. You do whatever you can. You organize with other people. You try. You try to get some kind of change, and if enough people do enough things, even if they're little things, they will add up. Because that's what happens in movements. Just millions of people doing small things which they cannot predict in its results. But
that's funny. The quotation that I send out with my emails is from Pete Seeger. I honestly believe the future is going to be millions of little things saving us.
Well, Pete was very wise. Pete is very wise.
What about the Internet and the new technologies? Do you see that as playing a role in this uprising?
Well, I think the Internet can play a very important role, especially since the major media are controlled by a few huge corporations. And I mean, you look in vain on NBC and CBS and ABC or the major cables. You look in vain for real sharp criticism of our policy, or for fundamental criticism. You don't find on any of these networks. You don't find anybody saying, "Oh, we should withdraw our troops from all countries in the world. We should not have a huge military." But you don't hear that, and so we need alternative media. We need radio stations like yours. Radio programs like yours.
And this is the Rob Kall Show, WNJC 1360, and I'm talking with Howard Zinn. How's that?
You must, let people know who you are, because these radio programs outside of the mainstream, and yes, the Internet. The Internet is a democratic forum. It can reach millions of people outside of the major news channels. And so I think, and it has already shown itself. There have been instances where, for instance, the organization Move On was able through the Internet to connect with millions of people across the country. And so I think the Internet can play a very important role in organizing people, mobilizing people, spreading information that they don't get in the major media. Without the Internet, we could not have had, as we did in just before the invasion of Iraq in February 2003. Remember that on one day, the same day, all around the world, I think it was February 15th, same day, all over the world, people demonstrated against war. Couldn't have done that without the Internet.
I publish opednews.com, a progressive media site that reaches about 500,000 unique visitors a month, and it's left of most of the other liberal sites out there. And so we have a lot of people on the site talking about this election as though it's meaningless. And some of them say don't vote at all, and some of them say I'm sick and tired of voting for the lesser of two evils, meaning McCain or Obama, so I'm going to vote for a third-party candidate. What do you think about that?
Well, I totally understand the frustration. Totally understand the feeling of voting for somebody who you don't think is going to make fundamental change. And yet, I believe that, let me put it this way, for 2 minutes, I will support Obama. At the moment you go into the voting booth, you don't have any choice. The system has not given you a choice. And it's A versus B, or A versus A prime, you see. And at that moment, I'll put it another way. While none of these major candidates are going to make fundamental change, there are candidates who may be more susceptible to pressure and to agitation and to organization than others. For instance, I think Roosevelt, who was not going to make fundamental change, but he was open to it, more open to it than Hoover, more likely to respond to the trade unions and the strikes than Hoover was. And I think maybe, just maybe, Obama, despite his limitations, will be more susceptible to pressure from outside. I don't think people should put their energies into the electoral system, into the voting system. And I think third parties are good when they carry on campaigns that present alternatives. Nader does very important work in telling the truth when no major candidate will tell the truth. But in the end, at that moment of voting, well, I think you have to concede that there may be a slight advantage, and we can use every slight advantage we need, every slight advantage we can get. There may be a slight advantage having one rather than the other, so long as you don't then sit back and wait for this slightly better candidate to do something good. No, you elect somebody who will be more open to you, and then you rush into that opening with as much energy as you can.
With his feet to the fire.
Yes.
So I got another question for you. The Congress has a popularity rating of around 9% now, 12% among Democrats. And what do you think? What do you think of this crew? And what about impeachment? I'm throwing them together.
Oh, impeachment. Well, I have been in favor of impeachment from I don't know for how long, but there is no impeachment. You know, some people talk about impeachment as if it's sort of a radical revolutionary thing. Impeachment is in the Constitution. Impeachment is constitutional. It's legal. It's very respectable. And impeachment is called for when high crimes and misdemeanors have been committed. And if there is any government, any administration that has committed high crimes and misdemeanors, it is this one.
What do you think? How do you think history will treat Nancy Pelosi for keeping impeachment off the table?
Oh, I don't think she'll even be mentioned. She won't deserve mention. These people are going to be obscure figures in history. I mean, if somebody does mention her, they'll mention the fact that she betrayed the ideals which she was supposed to stand for and the expectations that were made of her, because she was the first woman speaker and she spoke about bold change, and then she succumbed very weakly to the orthodoxy of the Republican and old line Democrats. So no, I don't think people will look happily on her. And I think the Democratic leaders who retreated from impeachment will be looked upon really as cowardly. This is a situation in which impeachment is a mild form of punishment, because these are war criminals in office. You know, the actor Viggo Mortensen wore a T-shirt, which I saw at an event that he was at. Viggo Mortensen, and he wore a T-shirt with 3 words on it: impeach, remove, jail.
Amen.
Yes.
Amen.
Yes.
So, do you have any advice for Obama?
Yes, I have advice for Obama. You want to win? Speak boldly to the American people want to get out of Iraq. Speak boldly. Say, I'm going to withdraw from Iraq as fast as ships and planes can carry them. And I think Obama will have a much better chance of winning the election, because he'll be speaking to the hearts of the American people who really are sick of the war. And instead he gives us these half-baked solutions about I'll withdraw in 16 months and we'll send some troops to Afghanistan and we'll keep some troops in Iraq for security purposes. Now that's not what the American people want. And if he thinks he will win more votes by being moderate and centrist, I think he's wrong. So my advice to Obama, not just from the standpoint of being right, but even from the standpoint of being pragmatic and winning, is be bold. Be bold on the war. Be bold on having a single-payer, government-financed health system. Be bold on ending our position as a militarist nation. Obama's calling for strong military, big military. He should stop doing that.
Obama's biggest challenge is white male voters, particularly Southern ones. Any ideas on what it will take to get them to move to the left, to stop supporting right-wing politicians who betray and screw them, basically?
Well, I think he has to talk more about class issues, more about how this government, and McCain is part of it, has been funneling all the wealth of this country into the rich. I mean, most of these white males are not rich people. They are middle class, they are poor, and I think he has to talk about how the Republicans are the party of the rich and how the Democrats are going to take up the legacy of Franklin D. Roosevelt and become a party of the poor and the middle class. I think that is his best chance. And I think he has to say to these people who may think, well, the Republicans are better on national security. Yeah, ask these white male voters, has our security been enhanced by the war in Iraq? Are we more secure now? And what is security? Is security gotten by military prowess, or do we need health security and employment security and all sorts of security for children and people in trouble? That's national security. In other words, he has to redefine all the terms that are being used.
That's a big challenge, isn't it? Yes. The languaging, the Frank Lunsing of American English.
Yes.
So I've got, as we wrap up here, I want to ask you one more question, and then I want you to talk about your new book for a moment. Do you have any heroes that are living in Congress, in the media, anywhere? Who are some of your heroes? Who are the people you respect the most?
I respect Ralph Nader. I know people are down on him because they think he spoiled the election. No, I respect him because he is the one national political figure who tells the truth about all of these issues. And
Any members of
I respect Amy Goodman for broadcasting the truth all over the country, for building up a network of Democracy Now! Stations which tell people things that nobody else will tell him. Is there anybody in Congress that I respect? I respect those few members of Congress who have called for impeachment and who have called for an end to the war and for an end to funding the war. There are a few people like that in Congress, but not very many.
Any journalists?
Any journalists? Well, you have names in mind?
No.
No. I just yes.
No. I just anybody.
There's this fellow on MSNBC.
Keith Olbermann.
Yeah, Keith Olbermann. I respect him. I respect Bill Moyers. Bill Moyers is a rare journalist, and he has on on PBS. He brings ideas and people that you won't see anywhere else. He's sort of the advance guard of public television. A lot of public television is very mealy and very weak, and Bill Moyers brings strength and integrity to the media.
Okay, now you've got a new book out. Tell us about the book.
You're talking about Empire?
Yes.
People's History of Empire. Yeah, by the way, it's not just me. It's a fellow named Mike Konopacki, who's the cartoonist. It's a cartoon book, a graphic book. It puts the history of American imperialism in graphic terms with wonderful cartoons, and Paul Beulah did a lot of the research on it. So there are three of us who really are involved, so I don't want it to be seen as simply my book, but I'll accept the idea that it's mine. It's called A People's History of American Empire, and it's fun to read. I mean, you might say, is it fun to read about imperialism and war and so on?
Well, these are like really short cartoons, like a page or two, stories, things like that you can kind of pick up, put down.
Yes, it's readable. It's very readable. It's and kind of thing you can enjoy reading and learn something from. That's a rare combination, to learn something and to enjoy the learning.
Well, the first time I touched one of your books, it just blew my mind, and this has been an honor and a privilege to chat with you, and I hope we can do it together again sometime.
All you have to do is ask.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay, so next we have Dorothy Fadiman and Joan Brunwasser. Now, are you there?
I am there. Thank you.
Hi. Great. So, Dorothy, I saw your movie a couple weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And
Thank you.
It was hard on my teeth.
Oh.
It got me so mad. And, I'm somebody who knows what's been going on with this, but this just put it in my face. It's a very powerful movie.
Well, what we tried to do, which was a real exercise in paying attention to the most important moment in each of a number of different episodes and chapters of the story.
Ooh, you know what? Let me just take a step back.
Yeah.
This is Rob Kall and the Rob Kall Show, 1360 AM WNJC, and I'm talking to Dorothy Fadiman, who produced Stealing America, you'll give the full title, and Joan Brunwasser, my co-host, who is the voting integrity editor for opednews.com. So, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, what I was saying was so often this information is either not available, which is first, and unfortunately, most prevalent situation is you simply can't find the information about what went wrong with our elections, what can be done about that, and who indeed may be involved in that process. So what we did was we broke it down into very explicit, simple steps. And the film is almost like a child's guide to a situation that's so overwhelming that when you do get the information, you tend to go into denial and confusion and then impotence. And so we went backwards in time and we tried to build, we showed the long lines, we talked about long lines, we talked about there being not enough machines. We showed people trying to vote and actually their votes flipping from one candidate to another. So instead of just the gestalt of, oh, this election might have been stolen, piece by piece by piece, we tried to build the case.
Now, what you've done is you've created a documentary that just does a great job of showing it. Now, it's coming out. It's basically being shown around the country now. Is that right?
It is, and in fact, I know you broadcast largely in the Philadelphia area.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure. So, where is it going to be, and how can people find out about it?
All right. On August 22nd, it will open at the Ritz at Bourse at 400 Ransted Street, which is on 4th between Market and Chestnut, and a lot of local activists throughout Pennsylvania, actually in Philadelphia, throughout Pennsylvania, are working together because, for example, there's going to be a Q&A after every screening so people can ask the questions that come up from watching the film.
Now, will you be there?
I'm still deciding where to put my body because we have a lot of openings that week, and I probably will be, but I don't know which night. So that's a good question, and actually the question probably moves me forward, but we're also that same night opening in Minneapolis. We're opening in, we're opening in actually Detroit, Michigan.
Go ahead, make the list, because we've got internet listeners all over the place.
Well, I will. Do you want to hear right now where we're going to be when?
Yeah, go ahead. I mean,
okay.
You've created something wonderful, and people should go out and see it, really.
Okay. On August 22nd, we're opening in Minneapolis, Minnesota, at the Oak Street Cinema. We're opening at the Ritz at Bourse in Philadelphia, and it's going to open at the Royal Oak in Michigan, which is right outside of Detroit. And then on the 29th, it's going to be in Washington, D.C. at the E Street Cinema. On the 29th, it's going to open at the Kendall Square Cinema in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And on August 29th, it's going to open in Santa Fe, New Mexico. On September 5th, actually that's been moved now, that's going to be now on the 19th. It opens in Portland, Oregon. And in September 5th, it'll open in Seattle, Washington. September 12th, it'll open in Berkeley, San Francisco, and San Jose. So we're having a grand Bay Area opening in Berkeley at the Shattuck, in San Francisco at the Lumiere, and in San Jose at the Camera Cinema. And then in September 26th, it finally gets to Ohio. And it will be in Columbus, Ohio, and that's going to be very exciting. It's going to be at the Landmarks Gateway Theater. Thank you for asking.
It's kind of like the center of it all, Ohio. so much, anyway. At least in your story, a lot of it happens in Ohio.
Well, I decided to go to Ohio to track one story in particular. The story that fascinated me and also just made my bones chill was when people were trying to vote, and in more than 90% of the cases for Kerry, and their votes would flip on the screen to Bush. And it was a strange phenomenon. It turns out it was happening in more than 13 states across the country. But Ray Beckerman reported that in one particular place in Ohio, Mahoning County, it was happening all day. So I went to Mahoning County and I began to interview people who had had this happen to them, which included the state senator. He voted for Kerry and his vote to Bush. Nowhere in the mainstream media was this reported. There was one line in the Washington Post, but aside from that, there was virtually nothing. So one of the most interesting, most chilling stories in the film does happen in Ohio, and it's the story of this vote flipping, which didn't get reported anywhere.
Now, have you taken your documentary to Congress, and have you shown it to anybody there? Because it is so frustrating for those of us in the movement to be this far along, 8 years after Chad's in Florida, and still no comprehensive legal document that makes for a safe vote. Have you had any contact with anybody?
Yes.
And what kind of response have you had?
We showed it to 13 members of Congress individually, and in a few cases it was actually their lead attorney, their chief of staff. And basically what we are realizing is people are ready to move, but it's got to come from the citizens. When you say members of Congress, yes, but what the film does after this 90 minutes of very well documented and sometimes unbelievable examples of irregularities that simply can't be explained away, we have a story at the end of one woman in New Mexico, and New Mexico was voting on machines, and they were getting very strange results, inexplicable results on machines, and she decided, Pat Leahan, that she wanted to pursue the whole move toward paper. And one by one, she attracted other interested people throughout the state. And together, this little coalition began to speak to the legislature as a group with a purpose. They did their homework. They had attorneys. And the result is New Mexico legislature actually passed a paper ballot law, and Bill Richardson signed it. Now, you get that far, and then comes the snag in which they started counting the votes on optical scan printers. And as we all know, even though paper can be recounted and audited, the optical scan printers themselves can be rigged. So the level of auditing and recounting that's necessary is fairly substantial. So now that same group of activists is moving toward hand-counted paper ballots, which really, according to activists across the country and around the world, is the gold standard.
I think so. There are some who want to see optical scanning with the paper ballot, which is a kind of somewhat of a compromise. But as long as there's that paper ballot, you've always got the raw piece of democracy to fall back to.
Right. And Joan, I know that you have had a number of articles over the years of people who've discussed the paper ballot issue. I just wonder what your sense is of that challenge and that opportunity.
Well, I think that people are wrestling with this, and the whole business about what's going on in New York now with the lever machines and how to proceed. It's in a way it's sort of split the election integrity movement. There are people who just want to get rid of DREs and the optical scanners and rely on the lever machines that they have. New York is the last state to fulfill the HABA requirements, or to move towards paper ballots if they can. And there's a real split on strategy, and that's not really clear about how to. People realize that there are problems, but they're not quite sure how to go about it. So I was going to say that thank you for bringing me in. I also, having seen the film like Rob, was very moved by it, and I wanted to give a little perspective, because this is not your first film, and you have been doing this for many years, and many topics totally not connected, not political, not connected to elections. So I wanted to sort of give an overview, because I think it would be interesting to our listeners, because your films have personalized topics like reproductive rights, HIV/AIDS, women in rural India, living with devastating injuries, and then we have this massive piece on elections. So the question comes up: why elections? Why now?
Oh, that's a really good question, and the answer is in my bones, which is each of these films has a common theme, which is how do people overcome an apparent adversity in a way that's creative, personal to them, and that succeeds in getting past the barriers. So, for example, the woman with spinal cord injury was told she would never move again from the shoulders down. And basically she said, "Thank you for sharing." And her entire community began to work with her to bring her body back to life in the subtlest, most complicated, most loving ways of touching and feedback and so on. This woman, who was told she'd never move again from the shoulders down, is learning to walk again. Women in the back alleys, I tell the story of how we moved from women dying on wards in county hospitals and state hospitals with infections from back alley abortions toward Roe v. Wade, and how we absolutely tackled the existing resistance and the ignorance and the obstructions and got to Roe v. Wade, and of course now need to protect it. So similarly, when we look at the election situation, when people go to vote, and it's been difficult for them to register, if they can register at all, which is a whole other problem, and they have to stand in line for hours and hours and hours, and then when they get to the end of the line, they're challenged in ways that are inappropriate and sometimes illegal, that person doesn't want to vote again. They feel that the system has created barriers that are simply making it not worth it. So one of the reasons the film ends on a note of hope and a note of possibility is I want people who feel like this is insurmountable. And again, this is all the films have a version of this theme in it, who feel that the system is so well developed and so successful at obstruction, why even try to get past that? I want to instill in people a sense that we can actually work together to create this breakthrough in which citizens reclaim our own elections. And Rob, when you asked me about Congress, yes, but it's got to come from the citizens first. And we have a website. We have a really good website. It's stealingamerica.org. And on that website, there's many, many, many actions that people can take, from the simplest of simply offering and being willing to work at the polls or be an observer, to actually becoming majorly involved with crafting legislation like the people in New Mexico did, to writing letters to the editor. Just there's a wide spectrum of things you can do. So the purpose of the film is to make it clear that we have a serious problem, and then to make it clear that we don't have to be victims, but that we can be proactive.
I wanted to speak to that because I agree 100%. There definitely is that thread that runs through all your films. And even though this film is deals with a heavy topic of vote suppression and stolen elections, it is remarkably upbeat. I'd like to read just a small section from one of the reviews that you got and get your comment. This is from Martin Grove for The Hollywood Reporter. So he says, this year's scariest movie isn't, as you might expect, a horror film, a slasher thriller, or a comic book-driven monster fantasy. No, top honors in the scary film department definitely go to Dorothy Fadiman's all-too-real documentary, Stealing America, Vote by Vote. While a good horror genre movie will keep you on the edge of your seat, Stealing will send you out of the theater terrified for the future of democracy in America. And he goes on. So I'm wondering if you feel that this is an accurate description of your film.
Oh, it's a magnificent description. Thank you for reading it. And who came to mind as you read that was my beautiful, wonderful mother-in-law, who was smoking 2 packs a day, and she got lung cancer, and she had surgery, and they took out a lobe of one lung, and then they actually had to take out more. And she never smoked another cigarette in her life because she was scared by what actually happened into becoming proactive for herself. She had thought about stopping smoking. She had heard about stopping smoking. But it's only when they took a piece of her lung out that she got it. And she never smoked again in her life. Not one cigarette. So that's what I hope the film will do. It's like, look at they're cutting us up alive. And I do want, thank you, Joan. I want to say one other thing, which is many of us never see it. Many of us never hear it. And for many of us, it doesn't happen to us. What the film does, it goes behind the scenes. And we hear Robert F. Kennedy Jr. say, because he did the research, that in Columbus, Ohio, minority voters, particularly African Americans, waited an average of 3.5 hours to vote. White suburban voters waited an average of 18 minutes to vote. That's what many of us never see. But if you go to the film, you'll see it.
Right, that's totally true.
It's immoral and criminal and disgusting, and it makes me very angry.
Well, I hope it will, but I hope that anger can get composted into action that is going to take a lot of us. No one of us can do it. It truly is going to take a massive effort of coordinated, mutually supportive action to clarify our goals and to work toward this. I mean, there are organizations that do this. Election Defense Alliance, for example, has brought together a number of groups that are interested in working together toward this. Black box voting, many groups check in with black box voting, and they've created a magnificent toolkit of how to address these problems in your own communities. And there's books, Mark Crispin Miller's Loser Take All, that sheds light on the problem in a way that you can go in much greater depth than a film can. There are other films, uncounted. I mean, you have to, we have to inform ourselves, and then we have to reach out to each other.
I'm fascinated always about what goes on behind the scenes. So I know that this was a departure for you. This is the first time in all the documentaries that you've made over the last 30 years that you chose to take the commercial theater route. So please take a minute and tell us why you made this departure from your usual route.
I will answer that question, but before that, I'd like to address an even greater departure.
And we have about 3 minutes left.
Okay, I'll do both, but this one is actually even more to the point for me, and then I'll speak to that, which is, I have narrated every film myself, and I've won well over 50 awards, Academy Award nomination, an Emmy, the CTV Gold Medal, all kinds of awards, narrating the films myself. I invited Peter Coyote to narrate this film. His voice has the compassion, the strength, the clarity, but what I realized is that this film is going to go mainstream. I hate to admit this, but if a woman narrates it, it's not going to have the power as if someone like Peter Coyote, who has this magnificent voice of everyman, speaking And that was the hugest departure that I made. As for theatrical release, we wanted to get reviews, honestly. We wanted actually to be taken seriously and try to crack through this glass ceiling. And we have.
Well, good for you. It is a great film and well worth seeing.
What are your hopes for it?
My hopes is that after it finishes an initial theatrical release, we'll have DVDs spread like wildfire across the country and around the world. We're already getting requests from other countries because this story of how our elections have been broken down and potentially it looks like rigged, but certainly the irregularities can't be explained away, is a story that must be told, and then the next step is how then shall we live.
Absolutely. Well, you've done a wonderful job. Thank you for what you've done, and keep up the great work.
And can I give the website one more time?
Go ahead, yes.
StealingAmerica.org, and you get the action items, and you also get a really glorious 2-minute preview teaser right there so you can get a glimpse.
All right, this is Rob Kall talking to Dorothy Fadiman, who created an incredible movie you need to go out and see called Stealing America, coming to a theater near you. This is 1360 AM, WNJC, and see you next week at 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock Wednesday night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
And don't forget, it's in Philadelphia.
All right. WNJC, Rob Kall Show from opednews.com. Good night.
Good night.